Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news. This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Catch us live weekdays at 7 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay or Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Julia Coronado now, Macropolicy Perspectives on the Fed, on our economy. Julia, there's a dual mandate, jobs, inflation. I'm sorry, real economic growth matters too. Are you marking down your real GDP and your nominal GDP?
Well, we're definitely marking down our real GDP. We do now expect a recession to start in the second half of this year in the United States. And nominal GDP, that's another question because we do expect a burst of inflation from these tariffs. That's one of the factors we expect will take the U.S. economy into recession is the hit to profits, the hit to purchasing power. It looks like it's a difficult road ahead. Could
you model out a 5% and plus unemployment rate? Or someone this weekend said, can we go to 6%?
Sure. I don't see, there's two ways to look at a potential recession in the U.S. On the one hand, the U.S. economy has been in extraordinary shape going into this. There aren't obvious imbalances in the U.S. economy. We don't have an over-indebted consumer. The banking sector looks pretty healthy. So that would argue for maybe a milder recession. On the other hand, we're just seeing a generational change. This is an existential shift in the role of the U.S. economy and the global economy and the global world order and capital markets. And that could certainly argue for a deeper recession. So on average, we pencil in an average post-war recession, and that certainly gives you an unemployment rate close to 6%.
So Julia, I guess as we think about these tariffs here, what are the upside from your perspective for this tariff policy?
I don't see a lot of upside. I don't see a coherent strategy. It is, a strategy of pushing our allies away rather than pulling them closer to address maybe some of the real issues we have in terms of trading practices with China. The method of on again, off again, not knowing what the ask is in terms of these bilateral negotiations, it just seems very chaotic. So in addition to the actual hit from the tariffs themselves, there's just tremendous uncertainty as to, what the policy will be. If you negotiate a deal, will it stick, or will that be reneged upon, a few months down the road? The U.S. has become an unreliable negotiating partner. So,
Julia, when we talk about this economy, we have to talk about the consumer here. How do you view the consumer here today? How precarious a position, if any, is the consumer facing right now?
So going into this, the labor market is pretty solid, but it has cooled a lot. And what we had seen was that we'd seen a rotation away from strength amongst the lower wage consumer towards the economy really being driven by kind of the wealth effects in the higher end consumer last year. So middle consumers had already gotten pretty budget conscious, they had been hit more disproportionately by higher interest rates. So they were already feeling a bit of a squeeze. And higher income consumers have been doing well and certainly had really strong portfolios going into this year. But now that foundation has taken a bit of a hit, and we would certainly expect some additional downside ahead in terms of asset valuations.
We welcome all of you across the nation this morning. Paul Sweeney and Tom Keene. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on YouTube. Good morning. Humbled by the global reach of YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts, and of course on Android Auto, Apple CarPlay as well. Good morning to Bloomberg 1130. In New York. Julia Coronado with us. Meghan Clark of St. John's University will join us here in a bit. Dr. Coronado, the tumultuous time that we're in, does the Fed find a new process, a new path, or do they just say, we're going to get through April, May, June, out to Jackson Hole?
I think the Fed is going to approach its mandates the way it always has. It's going to look at the state of the economy and the risks to the economy. I think what we've heard is a sort of stern message from Chair Powell in the sense that they're facing difficult trade-offs, at least in the near term. They don't know, they see risks to their employment mandate, they see risks to their inflation mandate. They go in opposing directions in terms of the policy prescription. So they're just going to have to see which one is the dominant influence. But the starting point in terms of their own assessment is that we are in balance in the labor market. So they're checking the box on their full employment mandate right now. But they are not checking the box on their inflation mandate. We are not at 2%. Right. We've gotten a lot closer. The underlying dynamics look okay. But if we experience an inflationary shock on top of that, that pushes them further away from already a gap that they're not particularly happy with.
Dr. Coronado, thank you so much. Greatly appreciated. Julia Coronado, Macropolicy Perspectives.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Listen live each weekday starting at 7 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
And Paul Sweeney and I begin our coverage of the death of Pope Francis. And what we're trying to do is bring you informed people about his life, the present, and the future that we will see for the Catholic Church and its reach across 1.4 billion people worldwide. We start strong with excellence out of Fordham University, Boston College. Meghan Clark joins us now with St. John's University, where she does important work on moral theology, among others. Meghan, thank you so much for beginning our coverage of the death of the Pope. You wrote a while back on Thomas Aquinas, and you said, good is to be done and pursued, and evil is to be avoided. How permanent is the method, the process, the pastoral effort of Pope Francis, or do you look at it as a one-off Pope versus what the future would bring?
I think that Pope Francis, I don't think it's wise to call him a one-off in terms of the impact that he had on both the Roman Catholic Church and the world. What Pope Francis really showed us is how to take the method of Vatican II and really globalize it and live it in ways that inspired billions of people.
Do we understand how unique he was? I've always thought from a distance from the church that we really don't understand the moment there where he took over from Pope Benedict. How unique was it, I believe, 13, 12 years ago?
We knew something was a little bit different when he came out in all white and insisted that before he give the square his blessing, that he asked everyone to pray for him. I think that every pope is a little bit unique, and they bring all of their life experience and their challenges and their gifts and their graces. But there is something about Pope Francis's humility and humanity that just deeply connected with people.
Meghan, now the Catholic Church and the Holy See and the cardinals, they turn their attention to electing a new pope. What are the pulls and pushes that we're going to see over the coming days?
So it's going to take a while, and Pope Francis will have all of the papal funeral process, and a whole lot of people have to get to Rome before they will begin a conclave. But really, the most important thing for everyone in that room is going to be really trying to figure out and pray. Where is the Holy Spirit guiding them to really figure out what the church needs? And that's, we're here in the United States, but it's a global church. And so kind of what we think of here often as kind of the big issues aren't always the big issues for the cardinals coming from places like Congo or El Salvador or all across the world.
And Meghan, the Catholic Church, the Holy See, it's not unlike or not too dissimilar to a lot of countries around the world where there are profound liberal elements of the church and profound conservative elements of the church. To what extent will they have to, I guess, agree on electing a next pope? Who has maybe the upper hand, do you think?
I think the reality is the majority of the College of Cardinals were elevated to the status of cardinal by Pope Francis at this point. And so I think that's going to be something that, because he has been pope for quite some time. I think the reality of how to continue the level of engagement globally, not just of kind of church leaders, but of the people, that happened over the last 2-3 years with the synod. You had really mobilizing and conversations starting in every small diocese across the world. And so I think there is going to be attention to continuing this to be a listening church, as Pope Francis has tried to show us how to be a listening church.
Meghan Clark of St. John's with us as we continue our coverage of markets challenged this morning, looking to the events in Washington as well, and also the death of Pope Francis. Meghan Clark, again, out of Fordham and Boston College, just with very early work. Her book, The Vision of Catholic Social Thought, was profound in 2014. Meghan, as simple as I can, this is a pope that had to deal with social media. I go back through my childhood, Paul, all of us in our experience. These are popes that moved at slow motion. How does the Catholic Church and your study of its theology, how does it change in a world of social media?
It has to be more responsive and more visibly present in ways it didn't have to before. And I think we saw that with Pope Francis's attention to the environment. He really focused our attention most on the environment and the plight of migrants around the world, and did that. He knew how to do that by both what he said, but also where he went and who he met with. And he would go to the people in places. And so things like his first visit was to migrants at Lampedusa, was something that was a pastoral choice to do, but it also was, in a global media world, something that was astute.
Okay, but his parents were Italian. He was in Argentina, the first pope since the 15th century, I believe, to be outside of the Italian-European orbit. You're saying that is now entrenched with his work of 12 years?
I think the institutional changes that Pope Francis made, as well as the pastoral message of really focusing our attention on the margins of society and the world, and on the need to protect our common home, they were priorities before Francis, but he moved them to the center, and I think that's something that's going to stick around.
Meghan, is there a front runner to be the next pope? Is there maybe a geographic part of the world that maybe needs to show leadership?
I think that there's really no way. I'm a scholar and a theologian, so I'm not going to. I'm not going to play into the politics.
Yeah.
I will say that, with Pope Francis, the Holy Spirit certainly surprised everybody. So we will see.
Meghan, that was beautifully answered, and I'm sure the head of compliance at St. John's University is in awe of your ability to dodge Paul's difficult question. Meghan, what to me is so interesting, and thank you so much for beginning our coverage of this process, if you will, of the Catholic Church. We all have our images, but one of them is a recent movie. Did you see Conclave?
I did.
How off the mark was it, Professor?
Well, Hollywood always takes its liberties. But the thing that I will say about that movie is that I do think you get a sense of the difficulty that lays before the Cardinals in the coming weeks, as well as everything else aside, everybody who will be in that room to determine who will lead my church. It is going to be people who in goodwill are prayerfully trying to figure out who is the best. Because it's not about ideologies. It's not about positions, theological or political. You're electing a person. And the person that Jorge Mario Bergoglio had the grace to lead the church really powerfully and beautifully. One of the highlights, most important moments of my life is getting to meet Pope Francis after working on a project in 2022. And, there is just something that was communicated by just being around a holy man that, they got to try and figure out who has the grace and the strength and the courage.
Meghan Clark, thank you so much. We hope we can call on you in the next coming days. A Fulbright scholar out of Fordham and Boston College, and now at St. John's University. It's shocking, Paul, her accomplishments.
Thank you for
in so
having me.
many short years. The only equivalent I can think of is Elizabeth economy on China.
Right.
It's just overwhelming what Meghan Clark has accomplished within the academics of the Catholic Church.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Or watch us live on YouTube.
Gautam Mukunda with us this morning. He's at Yale University with some outstanding books out, including Picking Presidents. Thrilled that he could join us today. Very busy news cycle here. The VIX $31.82 in retreat. So at Yale, you can't get admitted unless you read 876 pages of Jonathan Spence, The Search for Modern China. You just can't go to Yale. I've actually read it cover to cover, every word. It's a rite of passage and all that. Forget about giving the Chinese leadership Jonathan Spence's The Search for Modern China. What if we gave him your book, Picking Presidents? What do you see out of Beijing as they look back on the presidency you've studied so well?
I will quote. So I lived in Beijing in 2016, the first time Trump won, and I will quote a senior Chinese official who said to me, "If you guys want to give us leadership of the world, we will take it." And that's basically the simplest answer, except this time it's that on steroids. If there is a source of American influence and power relative to China that has not been weakened by this administration, I don't know what it is.
Urgent message here for Surveillance World. David Gura sends in a note. Thank you, David, for listening this morning in your 3-hour work week. Gura also read every page of The Search for Modern China. So in 2016, you were in Beijing, and those red doors were shocked at what was happening. How do they negotiate? People say we're negotiating. I'm like, after the Japanese news this weekend, really? Are we negotiating, Professor?
I mean, I'm sure that they're talking because there'll be back channel discussions at all times, but right, it is a cliche to quote Sun Tzu about the Chinese, so I'm not going to do that, but I'll say it is a general rule of strategy that when your enemy is making a mistake, get out of the way.
Exactly.
And I think the Chinese see that quite clearly.
Well, I just don't see negotiation going on, whether it's with Vietnam or Poland. I just don't get it.
I don't know, but I guess that one of the questions, if you talk to administration, what we're experiencing now is short-term pain for longer-term gain of reordering global economics, where more manufacturing comes back to the U.S. How do you kind of view that outlook?
So I find this astonishing that they have made a diagnosis that's not crazy, right? Like the U.S. probably should have a lot more manufacturing, both for economic and for national security reasons. That's something you'd find a consensus on across the political spectrum, except every policy they've adopted is going to take us further away from that goal, not closer. Taxing intermediate imports. Much of the stuff that the United States imports is things that are used as components in manufacturing. This is going to cripple American manufacturing. It's not going to help it.
So how do you think this plays out here? I mean, it's at some point, the economic pushback, whether it's inflation, whether it's slower economic growth, that's going to become an issue for people. How do you think that's going to play out?
It is. Thorsten Slock from Apollo yesterday, or just sent out an email saying he's predicting a 4% drop in U.S. GDP this year.
Wow.
with non-linearities that could make it much worse, right? Because that doesn't account for, say, supply chain collapses that are worse than anything we saw in COVID, which we're already starting to see the first signs of. That's about the same size decrease in GDP as the 2008 financial crisis, with more potential on the downside than the upside. This administration is not insensitive to political pressures. We just saw that back off with the tariffs when the bond market clearly frightened even Donald Trump into saying we need to back off. But this is not primarily, from what I can tell, a set of economic policies. This is a cultural reorientation of the country, a cultural revolution, Paul Krugman said this morning, which a lot of people are starting to make the comparison. I'm not sure economics are going to be a driver in the short term.
Gautam Mukunda with us here, Yale University, with wonderful books on the presidency. This is off your remit, but I got to ask. Hannah Zhang writing it up in Secondaries Investors, which is a wicked internal investment website, if you will, for like private credit, private equity. Your Yale is rumored from 4 sources to sell up to $6 billion of private equity portfolio. Harvard's been turned upside down, 14 other schools, maybe Yale's dodged a bullet so far. And I don't want you to speak for Yale on the unleashing of private equity, but I do want you to speak about your study of the silence of leverage that's out there. We're all walking around, we're not leveraged like 87 or 98. Really? Are we?
So there's so much of the market that has become less and less transparent over time, right? Between private credit, sort of different things. My greatest concern is we don't know.
We don't know.
Right? Yeah, the Fed is going to try to make policy in the dark to an extent that is not it's not new, but it's not easy. At the same time that the president is putting enormous pressure on it and threatening to fire the chairman of the Fed. That's not a great combination.
So where do you think we go over the next 6 to 12 months here? Is there a role for Congress to push back, or do we just kind of sit back and say, let's see how these policies play out? I mean,
of course there's a role for Congress. I'm not sure that I see them taking it. Partly because of gerrymandering, partly because the Senate is such a favorable terrain for the Republicans in this midterm that a lot of the Republican senators are going to say, hey, I'm fine. My only challenge is from the right. That being said, if we really take a 2008 style downturn, or worse, as was in the offing a couple of weeks ago, Republicans are going to be worried that they're going to see something that looks a lot like 1932, right? Where essentially Republican power was wiped out for a generation. And at that point, the party may respond. It's just my fear is it'll be too late.
There's a lot of portraits in the Oval Office right now. Which is the most important presidential portrait for President Trump? Is it Andrew Jackson or is it someone else I'm missing?
So it used to be Andrew Jackson. I don't think he put the portrait up, but he has somehow become obsessed with William McKinley, who he believes that McKinley's tariffs made the United States more prosperous than it's ever been. He says this over and over again. I genuinely think his maybe only secure policy belief is the value of tariffs. But just note that McKinley's tariffs, any economist will tell you, were not a success. They were a disaster.
And he reneged on him. Reneged may be too harsh, folks, but President McKinley reversed, I believe.
McKinley however, was a much more traditional Republican. Right? He was an establishment Republican. He was backed by the Republican establishment. Mark Hanna, the Karl Rove of his generation, was the power factor.
Listen to you.
he was the power factor behind
Blaine and Maine
McKinley.
and all that.
Trump is not like that.
I got 1 minute left here. But one day I woke up, folks, in my ute, and I realized I had no clue about late 19th century America. It was unspoken. My grandparents would talk about it. I grew up in a really strange house. So I read the 2-volume Alan Nevins on Grover Cleveland Alexander. I always say that. Nobody in the modern day gets what I'm doing. Anyways, from Grover Cleveland, it was all party politics then. There's a lot of similarities between the political system now and back then, isn't there?
There are. And the American political system does not function well when it is evenly split. That is a rule of American politics that goes back right to the beginning that we forget all the time. What we have when we have a well-functioning government is a dominant party and a subordinate party. And usually that goes for a generation or two at a time. If the downturn, right now, Republicans have the power, but if we get a collapse...
we could keep this a 4-hour conversation. I got 30 seconds. Where in God's name are the Democrats if they took 49% of the vote?
struggling, emerging, and I think coming out of their shock. Cory Booker's 25-hour marathon, when he did it, we were all very skeptical.
It's like one of your lectures at Yale.
He got 350 million likes on TikTok. 350 million. I think they're starting to understand this new social media environment, and maybe some players are starting to get there some traction. Never
enough time. Gautam, thank you so much. Gautam Mukunda, can't say enough about his efforts here with the Yale School, and of course, Picking Presidents is the book.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Listen live each weekday starting at 7 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Drew Mattis with us with MetLife here this morning as we pick up the pieces with a challenging market. I'm just going to cut to the chase. You got the best title of a note I've seen, Trade War is Hell. And there we were at 7 p.m. last night watching gold out over $3,400 weakness. Bring that back to the vanilla barbell 60-40 portfolio, or are they separate from how you would look money out 3 years?
I mean, they're not separate. One of the things I've always looked at is the relationship between gold and the behavior of financial assets. And when people are moving towards gold, it's a sign that they've lost faith in something. Right, we're not really sure what. Typically, I'd always looked at that as a measure of Fed credibility, but this could just be a policy credibility story. And it's pretty clear that the policy credibility story is beginning to weaken, and that's creating problems. And with the rollback in those tariffs we saw last week, we actually moved to a recession call when the tariffs were put in place. We waited until that Wednesday for them to actually be put in place because we figured he could pull back before then. But once he put them in place, the damage was done by the time 2 o'clock in the afternoon rolled around, and they pulled them back. Equity markets have been down sharply. The wealth effect has been crippled, and upper income consumers are the ones you have to watch going forward now. And my guess is they're going to pull back and start saving a little more for a rainy day.
How much damage does just the discussion of tariffs and the back and forth, how much real economic damage has that done? Will we see that in significantly lower GDP numbers going forward, do you think?
I think you'll see it because it hit the equity market so hard. In terms of actually, the tariffs themselves, I think, as long as there's a tariff policy put in place, then companies can figure out how they have to adapt to it. It's when it keeps changing, right? And so it's a matter of, you can't adapt to something that's constantly changing. And if you can't adapt because something is constantly changing, you're just going to wait to figure out where to put your money, right? So there's two reasons you wait to put your money. One is there's no time value to money, right? So zero interest rates, that's why zero interest rates are bad. And now you could have the best idea in the world and you put it in place and you put the money up to do it. And then there's a policy pronouncement that completely makes it an irrational decision that you've just made and spent a lot of money on. So the smart thing to do then is just not to spend the money.
What's your recession call these days?
So we're 60% that we're going to have a recession that looks like 90-91.
I lived through 90-91. That wasn't very fun.
No, it wasn't very fun, but there was a shock, right?
Yep.
We had a new world order shock,
Yep.
right? Where we thought there's no wars that are going to be fought, and all of a sudden there was a war, and it was a big war. And there was a price shock attached to it,
Yep.
so kind of like the tariff shock. The difference this time around, though, is it's not really clear how you retreat from that, right? In 90-91, once it was clear that the Allies were going to win the war, it was very obvious what was going to happen. And then people could move on and kind of begin to kind of invest again. This time around, it might, the faith might be damaged a little more, and it might take a little longer to get out of.
So recession risk at 60%. Where was that, 3 or 4 months ago?
We were at 30.
Okay.
When the initial tariff talk started, we went to 40. We went up to 75 when when we made our recession call, and then they pulled tariffs back, and that obviously took the risk down a little bit. But we still think the damage has been done.
In 1990.
Yeah.
That's the year that the Red Sox waived Jim Rice.
Is that right?
It's like the worst thing ever.
Fred Lynn, Jim Rice.
The Red Sox in 1990 set a record for most double plays in a season.
Hitting into double plays?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mattis said he'd only come on Patriots Day, so we're doing.
The minor leagues are tough.
Yeah, well, they sent Buckner down to the minor leagues in 1990. It was difficult to say the least. Okay, this is all great, but the bottom line is I don't get catharsis. I don't get panic. Everything's waiting for a policy maturity at the White House. Not, I don't want you to predict that, but that's one outcome, right? That they go, oh, Gilda Radner economy, Gilda Radner trade war. Oh, never mind. That's out there, Drew, isn't it?
And that's the problem. Once again, you can put any policy in place almost, and people will figure out how to adapt to it, right? There are a lot of smart people trying to figure these things out. They'll figure it out, but you can't figure out something that's constantly moving around, right? It's harder to hit a moving target than it is to hit a stationary target, and what Wall Street needs are stationary targets.
Okay, so you're an insurance company. Do you buy bonds? Is that the answer?
You take a real hard look at what bonds you're buying and make sure that they are all-weather bonds, and bonds that can basically are unlikely to be hit by tariff implications, unlikely to see massive credit changes to those. But it becomes increasingly difficult because once again, you're never sure which one's going to actually go into place and how long it's going to last for.
You didn't wear your surveillance bow tie today.
I didn't wear my surveillance bow tie, but on my way in here, I noticed more people in suits wearing ties. And I'm beginning to wonder, what I'd like to see is a study about whether people who wear ties to work make better decisions.
You were legendary at UBS. You worked for a guy named Maury Harris. And you guys would do these 12 and 14 page reports, which we all hated because it was like Ed Hyman stuff. You had to read it. Yep. It's like you couldn't read page 1 and, look smart. You had to actually read the thing. And buried on page 7 or page 9 was a Mattis wisdom. Buried on page 7, page 9 right now, where's your wisdom on the labor economy?
Well, I think we were having labor problems before all the tariff noise. And the number I'm really paying the most attention to right now is the work week, which has been in kind of free fall for a long time. And it's just at a level that's not consistent with having all these people employed. And so, the solution to that obviously becomes, once a firm has to figure out or make sure that they don't miss their earnings estimates. So the more volatile equities become, the more important it is for firms not to miss their earnings targets. And when you're worried about missing your earnings targets, you worry about your expenses. And if you've got people working the shortest work week they've worked since the great financial crisis, it's pretty obvious to figure out where those expense cuts are going to come from.
So tie that into the consumer. How's the consumer doing out there? Is the consumer as concerned as the financial markets on my screen show over the last 3 or 4 months?
I think the change is actually that we had lower income workers facing more and more strains, and you saw them straining to kind of save the holidays for their families, and we saw a big pickup in consumer credit. And then right after that, we saw a big decline or a big increase in people saying they're not going to be able to make their minimum payment in the next 3 months. I think the shock from the tariff story is going to really impact the wealth effect, because for the wealth effect to work on the equity basis, it really needs to be a sustained equity market rally, or it needs to seem permanent. And it takes longer for that to seem permanent than other wealth effects like housing, because home prices don't tend to be as volatile. Yep. And so the disruption that we saw in equities from that is going to have long-lasting effects in terms of people's willingness to spend money.
So where do you think the Fed fits in here, real quick?
Their job basically is to just stay out of the way. They can't actually cut rates because the data is not there, so they're going to have to lag. They're going to have to wait for unemployment to move noticeably higher before they can cut rates with political cover.
Drew, thank you so much. Drew Mattis with us with MetLife today.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Listen live each weekday starting at 7 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also watch us live every weekday on YouTube and always on the Bloomberg Terminal.
With our newspapers this morning, futures negative 72. A bit of lightness. Lisa Mateo with the newspapers. What do you have?
Let's do it. Let's talk about the Boston Marathon, all right? So it's getting underway, right, this morning. It brings in a lot of business, though, for like the local eateries, restaurants, from Framingham to Brookline to the Boston stretch. So some of them are actually opening early. So places like Eastern Standard Kitchen and Drink, breakfast Bloody Marys start pouring at 8 o'clock in the morning. Can't beat that. That's, of course, not for the runners, but for the spectators who want to get there early and have that. And then for the runners, they have a lot of deals, too, because after you're finished, you need something to eat, right? You got to get your
carbs.
energy back in. Yes, some carbs,
Yeah,
exactly. So you can get like a free cup of clam chowder, legal seafood if you're a runner. You can get a 26
pint of Guinness?
But you know what? After a race, actually, they gave you like I think it was like Bud Light or Coors Light. I don't even remember what it was. But they say having a beer after the race is
Did you
actually
do the thing where you have the aluminum foil around you afterwards?
They did. I wore that proudly,
You
like
wore
a
that
cape
proudly.
around New York City. I would not.
Did you
give
spill
it
a
up.
Guinness on it?
No.
Next.
You could have a beer after. It's actually very good for you. Okay, so we've talked about, there's talk about women getting cosmetic anti-aging procedures.
You have to invest in your face,
Yes, invest in the face, but it's not
steal.
just women, it's men
Really?
who are doing it too. So this
Really?
plastic surgeon spoke to Business Insider. He told them some of the most popular treatments, okay? Are you ready for it? Are you ready for it, Tom? The first is actually the link to baldness. I'm not pointing anyone. You all have a beautiful head of hair here.
I'll do yoga where you can't see that, folks.
Exactly. But they're getting these platelet-rich plasma injectables because they don't want the plugs anymore. So these are apparently a little bit less invasive, less expensive. Yes, the Botox. So yes, you can get a couple of those injections. Men are getting more of those. But an eye lift.
No, that's not the one. The headline is breast reduction is more common than you think.
You beat me to it.
All right.
They are. Well, you think about it, like when everyone's talking about weight loss drugs, no, they're just going for the straight-on surgery.
Can I ask a dumb question?
Of course.
If you do repeat Botox, doesn't it at some point not work?
No, it stimulates it again.
You
can
just
you have to
doing
keep
it.
doing it, like every 6 months maybe or so.
Can
You have to
you tell
repeat
when
it.
someone has it? You can tell, right?
You can tell by the lines up here, like if they don't look surprised.
Yeah.
If you don't see any lines on the forehead, that's kind of a telltale
Next,
sign.
give us one
there.
more. What do you got here? Quickly.
Okay, quickly. So Wall Street Journal talking about baseball's greatest hitters, right? Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, Joe DiMaggio, Mickey Mantle.
all
But they're
Yankees.
saying who is on the way to become the next Tom? Yes, Aaron Judge. 6'7", 10th season with the
He's
Yankees.
got a trust fund.
He does. No blue eyes. He celebrated his 1000th MLB game by hitting his 321st home run, the exact number that Ruth had through 1,000 games with the Yankees. So he's setting like all these records, but they're saying the only thing that may keep him from hitting that like highest echelon is kind of his age, because most of those, elite hitters were regulars by 21. But, Judge joined the Yankees at 24, so he has kind of a late start, but he's catching up, swiftly.
Yeah, we're watching it. Now they got to win a World Series with him in his prime.
And he's got to show up in the World Series.
Did you see his throw this weekend?
What's that?
I think it was to second base or third
the
base.
guy's-
It was magnificent.
He's got a gun. He can run the bases. He can
Edge
do
of
it all.
Dwight Evans.
Yep.
It was really, really quite good. Is that it?
Yes.
Thank you, Lisa
You're
Mateo.
welcome.
Thank you so much on some Monday newspapers needed over the weekend. Greatly appreciate that.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast, available on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Listen live each weekday, 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern on Bloomberg.com, the iHeartRadio app, TuneIn, and the Bloomberg Business app. You can also watch us live every weekday on YouTube and always on the Bloomberg Terminal.